Hey guys, welcome to this video. We are going to look at CAPsMAN. We're going to look at specifically CAPsMAN using the built-in Wi-Fi on our router, which is going to be our CAPsMAN server, as well as an external AP. So basically we've got this HAP AX2, which has built-in Wi-Fi 2 and 4 AX. We've also got this CAP AX connected to port 5, just as a direct connection, and then port 1 is going to go to the internet. So this is configured very similar to the way I've done other videos on basic setup, so check those out. There's a link to a playlist here that has them all. We're getting internet directly from my development network. We have a LAN set up on these 4 ports, and then we'll join that built-in Wi-Fi to this LAN, as well as the LAN from this one. So we're keeping it all single network for the LAN side. There's going to be no VLAN in, no multiple SSIDs in this video, but rest assured that will be coming in another one. I just wanted to keep the basic, and the thing I've already done a video. Check it out just up here again for setting up standalone APs as well as a CAPsMAN. As a CAPsMAN controlled AP. So we're going to do that as well, but we're also going to be looking at how you then work with your local. Bit of background to this. Previously, what you used to have to do is, because the wireless interfaces were in a separate menu to the CAPsMAN, you used to, if you wanted to use CAPsMAN, you would configure it all in a separate menu. So then what you'd do is join these local ones into that CAPsMAN configuration, because they would, otherwise you'd have to manually go through and configure them. So I'll show you that as we go through, but I just wanted to sort of make it clear the difference is how we do it now, rather than just controlling everything via the CAPsMAN. They will still be locally managed, if you like, but the configuration applied to them will be exactly the same profiles as we're going to use for the CAPsMAN. So yeah, without further ado, let's get going. So as I mentioned, this is the guide I made for setting up CAPsMAN. So this one is about single Wi-Fi access point setup. So I've gone through both the standalone and the CAPsMAN deployment. CAPsMAN, really just enabling those key features: security profile, channel frequencies, and setting up your profiles. And we've done that. You can either do this within the actual access point itself, or you can then do it via the CAPsMAN, which we're going to go look at. So we're kind of going to do a mixture of the two for this one. But the key thing I want to show you on this one, we'll come to when we come to do the frequencies, which is all this stuff here. So, but again, we'll come back to that. So basic setup, as I mentioned, this is the HAP AX I've just got some addresses on there. One is for my internet access, one is for my LAN, which is in a bridge. Within that bridge we have those 4 ports I mentioned, and Ether5 I've just labeled as being the one that's connected to the CAP. The CAP has been completely reset, factory reset, with no default configuration. So that means that we can configure it from scratch, but we'll get to it via layer 2 because it's currently connected into here, which is the same network as I'm currently plugged into on this machine, which is Ether 2. A word of warning, something that I've recently fallen foul to, is on the newer versions of your MikroTiks. So previously, when you used to get one factory out of the box, it came with no password, so you could log into it straight away, admin no password. And then it still came with a default configuration, which I always advocate that you get rid of, and you start from, you baseline it where you want it, so you know exactly what configuration you're putting in there. However, by default nowadays, it comes with a built-in password, which for this one in particular, this HAP I'm on right now, which I've shown in my other videos, is basically going to be on a sticker, and this is the exact one that for the one we're looking at now. So on the base of my router, which is just my test router, it comes with this password here. So the first time you log into it, you'll need that if you've reset it back to factory, or you've reset it using the physical method of holding the pin in, plugging the power in, taking waiting for the lights to flash, then removing the pin, and then that resets it back to its factory default. Okay, so the factory config that comes on there. So basically what I did is I got a new access point for my home, went up in the loft, plugged it in, it was already pre-cabled, went back down, went to configure it, and then realised I hadn't done any configuration to it at all, and I didn't know the password. Luckily, I still had the box, and in the box comes a little leaflet which talks about the warranty, I think, and stuff like that, which has a sticker on it which has that same information on there. So just bear in mind that if you are going to install them in hard to reach areas, make sure you know that information or pre-configure them first. Okay, so yeah, basic setup, LAN, WAN. I've got some basic firewall rule on there for my input chain, and then my NAT rule there. So there's not a lot else happening. Obviously, they've also got DHCP server running on my LAN as well. So when we connect our access point to it, it will get an IP address from that network. Like I mentioned, when I have any separate management network for this go, it's just going to be very much like you would have if it was just your home network, one flat network. So we'll start by doing the Wi-Fi on the local one, and I'll give you a bit of an overview of how it is now and how it used to be. So as I mentioned before, here we have those two built-in networks. If you're not overly familiar with MikroTik, you'll always get these same menu options here by standard, even if you've got a device that doesn't have Wi-Fi. So this could be a virtually deployed CHR, for example, where there's no Wi-Fi cards in them, but you would still have this menu for Wi-Fi, but when you click on it, there will just be nothing in here. So this is still have those options, but you can't actually do anything without the actual physical hardware in the device. So these are going to be our locally deployed Wi-Fi within that router itself. Now, as I was mentioning before, this used to be a separate menu, and then we would have a CAPsMAN menu as well. So, and before, you didn't have any of these options, which I'm going to go through in a minute. Along the top, you used to basically click on your card, whichever one you wanted, 2.4 or 5 gig, and you would do all the configuration in here. Now, if you wanted to use that basically this configuration menus options, but we would create the various different profiles and we stick them all together, and then we apply that profile to the network card. You would then have to basically turn this, say it's a CAPS AP, and point it at itself, and then run the CAPsMAN on it as well. Now, it doesn't work like that anymore, but basically we don't need to do that, because all we can do is actually the configuration that we're now going to apply to these, we will then be using for our CAPsMAN once we turn on that CAPsMAN feature. So then all additional APs that come in will use that same profile. So although the CAPsMAN won't technically be managing the network cards, the same configuration will be applied across all. So if we change a password, if we change an SSID, if we add an SSID, take it away, blah, 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 it's all done in the same thing. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. That's what I want to show you today. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our profiles up here. So we're going to start with our security. Add a new one. I'll just call this, security 1 is fine. We're going to give it WPA2 PSK, and we'll use CCMP as our cipher, and then we'll just give it a password, which I will just use my favorite test password, which is hello world 123, which I always say I never use in the real world. It's just for testing. Okay, so there's our password. Now we can sort our channels out. Now channels, I'm going to take you back to this article that I was talking about earlier. So in fact, before we go to this bit, I'll take you to another article I've got on my website, which talks about basically the 2.4 and the 5 gig spectrum. It goes into some information. I've kept it very high level, very simplistic. It's basically if there's a piece of information you think you knew or you've heard of and you want to just double check it, then that's the idea of this. So here we have our frequencies on 2.4. Now 2.4 only has up to maximum of 14 available channels, but that is region specific. So some of these countries wouldn't allow, only up to 11 or up to 12, for example. So really, because this is such a small spectrum, and the largest channel width we can get away with is 20 megahertz, that means we've only got 1, 6 and 11. as our what's called non-overlapping channels. So when they're all side by side, they don't interfere with each other. So you have to use one of those frequencies, and now often other brands will not ever allow you to deviate from this. They will only allow you to select either 1, 6 or 11 or auto, and it will only select from those 3. So what we're going to do, and when I come to the configuration I'll show you, it's not simply picking a channel number like it is in some other manufacturers. MikroTik, we need to know the actual frequency. So, but I've got a bit of an easy way to deploy that, which I'll show you, but I'll just show you the 5 gig spectrum next. Now that's split into these, basically these 4, well, 3 really, but then the 3 is split, the middle 2 is split in between 2 others. Now the middle 2, or the middle 1 if you like, UN and I2, is what's called the non-DFS. So the non-DFS is basically the radar detection. So if it detects anything non-Wi-Fi related and remotely radar-ish, it will basically turn your Wi-Fi off until it's clear to broadcast again. So that can cause all sorts of problems, obviously, as you can imagine. So what we do is we stick to the first band and then the third, which we refer to as non-DFS, and these are channels 36 to 48 and 149 to 165. So I've done here, I've just kind of laid it out on the 2. So what we're going to use is only these frequencies. So, and again, I always use 20 megahertz. I know you can use larger ones, but you end up just engulfing the whole frequency. And although when 5 gig came out, it was like massive compared to 2.4, it has now become very congested because, you know, more and more stuff uses Wi-Fi, more and more stuff is now using 5 gig Wi-Fi. So really, you really want to be keeping those down to 20 megahertz, certainly in a corporate environment. And then I do it in my house as well, because obviously I've got my neighbours' Wi-Fi as well to contend with if you're in a smaller, you know, area. And people buy a Wi-Fi device or they get sent it by their ISP, they stick it in wherever their connection is in their home, and that was just going to be broadcasting on whatever antenna gain, the full power is in that device. There'll be no smarts in there. So if it's on the side of the house that's next to yours, you're going to be getting, you know, a large chunk of their Wi-Fi in your house. So it's just a way to mitigate that. I mean, Wi-Fi 6 does have some, you know, is much more efficient nowadays with that channel, with that basically with the frequency. But still, I would always advocate to use the 20 megahertz. But again, that is my personal preference and advice. So back onto here, as you can see here, we'd have to go through and input these in each line, and then that means whatever's in these, whichever frequency is here, it will pick one of these, or we could just give it a single one if we wanted to actually set, if we knew our access points were in a particularly noisy area and we knew there was only one channel that was usable, we would want to manually set it, we would do it that way. But instead of having to create all these individual profiles, what I've done is I've split it into these commands you can put in the CLI, and these will configure them for you. So we have the first UNII1 channels, so there's all those 4 there, and then the 3, so they would be the individual channels, all 20 megahertz. And then basically these are the ranges, so we've got a single range for 1, single range for 3, and a combined one. So it means in the combined one it will pick out any of these ones. Okay, and I'll just call that 5 gig non-DFS. Now for 2.4, obviously it's smaller, we've only got the 3 we want to add, and if we were to do it, wanted to select a channel manually. If not, we've just got this, what I've called 2.4 auto, and again that is those 3 there. I will just say this is set to AX, but if you are using this for older versions, such as AC Wave 2, even N, you can still use this. You'll just need to change that band to whichever band you're using. Just bearing in mind the actual older devices may not have the same menu structure, but chances are you're using something that will still on the newest firmware will still work the same. And then here's that complete list. So just that's everything from above. We can just copy that. I'll just copy that into a notepad because sometimes it doesn't quite like copying between the website and the MikroTik itself. So just copy that back, and then we open up our CLI. There we go. Paste that in, and we've got all of those set for us now. So although we're probably never going to use these ones, it's always nice to have them as an option. So now we can go ahead and create our configuration files. So let's add one for 2.4 and 5 gig. Okay, so we'll do this one, we'll call this conf 2 gigahertz, and this one conf 5 gigahertz. Mode AP, SSID, let's call it MikroTik Masters. Now I always differentiate between my 2.4 and 5 when it comes to the SSID, just because I like to know that if I want a device on 5 gig, it's going to only ever be on 5 gig, and then we have all the 2.4 for any legacy devices or anywhere where 5 gig doesn't quite reach, because 2.4 will travel slightly further. And it's always good to specify your country, just for helps with the RF side of your network. Okay, channel. Now this is where we're going to select from those lists, basically from here. These will all be now populated in here. So this one is just remind myself, 2.4. So we want to select that auto, 2.4 auto, which is I must not have copied that one across. I bet it was the last one I didn't hit return. So we can just copy the whole lot back in there again. There we go. I'd hit that last return. There it goes. Now it's appeared at the top. So get rid of that. Now we should have, there we go, 2.4 auto. And then this one we're going to use the non-DFS range, so everything for there. We don't need to set any bands, channel width, or anything, because that's all done within here. And then security, we'll just that security profile we created. Okay, again, don't need to set anything else here. Okay, and now with the built-in ones, we are going to select the, sorry, no, we're not going to select the data path. I'll show you that in a second, actually. So then that's everything done for these two. We can just okay that. So now we have our configuration profiles, which are made up of the various parts in here that we can then change all in here. We can make changes directly to this. So if we want to select a specific channel for a different configuration, it can all be done in this part. So we'll overwrite this. But it's best I like to keep it nice and regimented so we know everything is configured how it should be. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open up these two and also let you know that if you've used older MikroTiks on the older firmwares, it used to be called wireless 1 and wireless 2, and now wireless 1 was your 2.4 and wireless 2 was your 5 gig. Now that is the other way around. So Wi-Fi 1 is in fact your 5 gig. So I will rename these. I like to rename names anyway when I've got more than one access point, because it just means that I can clearly see which is which. So Wi-Fi 1, as I mentioned, is 5 gig. Let's call that 5 gigahertz. And then we'll do the same for here. Just apply and apply, and you can see that rewrites that. Oh, sorry, I didn't change that, did I? There we go. So I've got 2.4 and 5, and it'll tell you which is what it originally was. So if you have named them incorrectly, because if you try and apply a 2.4 frequency to a 5 gig network, it will complain at you basically. So now what we do is we select one of those profiles. So configuration for 5 gig and then the configuration for 2.4. Now the one thing we're going to do on the local one is we're going to go ahead to the data path. Now the reason I haven't done this in the menu option up here or in the configuration file is this is only going to be applied to the local ones, and we'll do the same on our actual caps, but I'll show you that when we come to it. So we're just going to select the bridge for these ones, and this is basically means the network that's going to be when you connect to the SSID. What network do you want the MikroTik to put you in? And we want our clients to go into LAN bridging, because like I said, this is all just one network for now. It's the only network available for us to put in. Okay, so then that's those done. Now we can go ahead and enable that. Okay, there we go, it's picked its channels. And if we look at our Wi-Fi, there we go, we should have, there we are, 2.4 and 5. And let's just test this one out. Connected, and now we can see under registration. There we go, connected, and I have something else connected as well, which I must have been using to test with earlier. Not sure what that is, but yeah. We can then also see our IP address leases here. Okay, our Raspberry Pi is connected to it as well. That's what I was using to test earlier. But we've got, yeah, Luigi is the machine that I'm on right now. And as you can see, I've got two connections, one via Ether 2 and one via the 5 gig. Okay. So let's go ahead and configure our CAP side of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and configure that remote access point. But before we do that, we need to actually turn on the CAPsMAN service. Now there is going to be a bit when I come to show you the provisioning bit. I'm not going to do that now. What I'm going to do is show you it without it first, and then what I'm going to do is basically enable that part and show you what happens with that. So we go to the remote CAP and then CAPsMAN. We click enable. We select the interfaces that we're going to discover our access points on, which is going to be our LAN bridge. If we were using dedicated management network, that would be that one. Certificates, we're going to select to auto. So when we apply that, it generates 2 certificates for us, which we can then see under certificates. And then what's going to happen is the CAP itself, the access point, is going to request a certificate as well, which it will generate from here and download. And then it uses that to basically encrypt the communication for the management side of it. So now we've got our CAPsMAN running. We can go ahead and look at our remote access point. So like I mentioned before, it's factory reset. So it's got no IP address. We can get to it on this MAC address. It won't have a password. Okay, what we'll do is we'll set that password because A, it's best practice, and B, it will stop us from asking us every time. And also another thing, just log out again, log back in to Winbox using that password, and that way when we open up any terminals, it won't ask us for it every time. Okay, so now this is our CAP. Very little to do on this one. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a bridge. Now, if you're not familiar, the CAP has 2 network interfaces. You can effectively daisy chain if you want. I think PoE, Ether 2 gives out PoE, but low powered, so will only power certain things. And then it has the 2 network cards. So it looks very similar to a router. You could run this as a router if you wanted. And in fact, I think the default configuration has it set up like that, for Ether 1 being the WAN. And that's another thing to mention. I mentioned before about the password when you've got it factory set. Also, if you're trying to access it via its Ether 1, because that's what it technically refers to as its WAN interface, I believe it blocks any remote connection. So that's something else that you would have to connect then to the Wi-Fi SSID to be able to then reset it. But you would also then need the Wi-Fi password as well. So double jeopardy. So just make sure you'd always plan ahead before you actually physically install anything. Luckily, when I did it, it was just in my house, which is why I just quickly did it, so I could shin back up into my spider-infested loft and get that password if I needed to. Anyway, so we're going to create a bridge, but we're only going to put a single interface into it. And I will show you for why. In fact, I will show you back on the HAP. We'll just create that bridge first. Okay. And then we'll stick our Ether 1 into that bridge. If I jump back onto the HAP, I forgot to mention earlier, when I in each of these I added that bridge. Basically what that does is in the older version, once you configured your interfaces, you would have to go into your bridge and then you'd have to add them as interfaces as you would do any of your physical interfaces. As you can see, they're in there now under that LAN bridge, but that D basically means that it's dynamic. So it's dynamically added them into our bridge for us. So if I was to, so there's the 5 gig one, let's just remove that. As you can see, it disappears. Okay, so that's the reason why we're going to do the same on our cap, so it has a bridge for it to put the interfaces in. Now this is a little bit of a bugbear of mine. It used to be that you could select basically CAPsMAN forwarding, so that the access point, the SSID that the client's connected to, you specify the interfaces then would appear on the CAPsMAN side, and you could put those into the bridge on the actual controller. There would no need to specify any sort of routing or VLANs or anything, any interfaces on the actual AP itself. It would then be tunneled back to that controller by default using that feature. That has gone now, and it doesn't seem to be coming back, which is a bit of a shame, because it now means if we want multiple SSIDs in multiple VLANs, we have to make sure that we have the bridges to cover each of those networks, and then we have to have the VLANs configured between the access point and the controller. So any switches in between, we need to make sure that they're all trunked correctly. So, but that'll become clearer if I do a video on VLANing, so we won't look at that today. So there we go, there's our bridge and our port in our bridge. Now we're going to use that same bridge as our remote access, our management access, so we can add an IP address in that, which we'll just get via DHCP. So nothing fancier than that, and it'll pick up an IP address from our HAP, which is the same range as my computer's on, and it's the same range I got when I connected to the Wi-Fi. But that just gives us an IP to manage it off. Always advisable in your DHCP server to actually, I would recommend you set those IPs statically, make them static. If you're not familiar how to do that, we'll go back onto our HAP and we go IP DHCP server, and then there's our cap. We can just click make static. You see the little D disappears, and we can then actually change that if we wanted to. So if we call that, we wanted that to be on, while our DHCP scope is up to 200, and starts at 20. So let's call this one 10. Okay, and you can see its active address there is still 199. And then all we can do is just go to our interfaces, and let's just kill that network. We're going to lose access to the cap temporarily. We just enable it again, and then it should request or refresh its IP address to be, there we go, like I said, we lost access. It should get on .10 once it renews its IP. Jump back in and have a look. IP also hasn't renewed yet, so we'll just do it this way instead. Renew. There we are. So it's down to .10. So that's outside of our DHCP scope. So it's why it's always good to do that. Or obviously, if this was on a management network, you may not have DHCP on there. But it's just, but it's sort of a preference of mine. So okay, so we've got our basic setup now done. We don't worry too much about the firewall rules and stuff on these, because we are just using them as access points. And like I said, this is in a home deployment, but you may be in a corporate environment, you'd have this on a separate management network. So any clients connected wouldn't be able to access it, even if they tried. So now let's look at the Wi-Fi side. As I mentioned before, it looks very similar to the one before. We could go ahead and just manually configure these, but we're not going to do any of these configuration here, because we want this all to be controlled by the HAP, and we've already done that work. So all we need to do on this side of it is, instead of going to the remote cap side this time, we go under Wi-Fi and then cap. We enable it, we tell it where to look for its CAPsMAN server. We could have a specific IP address we wanted it to connect to, certainly if we weren't on the same layer 2 network, but we are, so we just can just discover it via layer 2. And then we certificate, that's what I mentioned before, we're going to request one. So when I apply that, it should generate one from the, there we go, which is basically just called it by its MAC address. If we look back on our HAP and go back into system certificates, there you can see that it's been issued. Okay, so that will, we then use those to communicate between each other. Okay, so we've got CAPsMAN running. Now, the next thing we need to do is basically tell these to be managed by CAPsMAN as well. So we basically told it how to get to the CAPsMAN server, and then we tell it which networks we want to be managed by CAPsMAN. Because you could have one, you could say, I just want 5 gig managed by CAPsMAn, and 2.4 is either not going to be used, or it's going to be used for something local or testing or something like that. So we go into configuration, we go to Manager, and then the drop down we just select CAPsMAN, and then we go to that data path and we tell it the bridge, and then so that dynamically adds them into that bridge on our cap. Okay, and then we do the same for this one. Bridge. I'm not going to bother renaming these ones because the idea is we won't ever be logging into the access point for any reason other than, you know, if we want to do a firmware upgrade, probably they will all the configuration will be handled by the controller. So now they're being managed by CAPsMAN. There we go, operated and operated, but we're not got any configuration. Sorry, that's like interface list. Where's the Wi-Fi? There we go, operated, but there's no configuration here because we haven't actually told them which config to use. So we could open up here, we could go to our configuration and select it there. That's one way of doing it, but one's if we had 100 access points we wanted to deploy. So that's where we use this provisioning tab, which I touched on earlier. So what this is doing is basically going to have a set of rules that will apply, and then based on those rules is what's config it will file or profile it will apply. So you can do it based on numerous things. So MAC address, you can have a specific MAC address or a MAC address. Basically, the first 6 hexadecimal characters represent the vendor MAC. So we could do that for the MikroTik one. If we could also do it based on its identity name, so whatever we call our access points, or IP ranges, or lots of other things. But we're going to do it based on band. So we just want to say any access point, any CAPsMAN access point we connect. We just want to make sure that we differentiate between the 2.4 and the 5. So that's why we're going to do it based on the band. So I'll just select if it's got AX in it. So if one of the bands available on that access point is AX, we want it to use the config files that we've selected, because we did select in the channels, we specified that band as well. So then we wanted to create and enable. You could create and disable. So if you had lots that you wanted to basically configure but you don't actually want them propagating yet, you can just enable them later, but we wanted to enable them straight away. Okay, and then we want to apply the master config for each of them. So 5 gig and 2.4. There's one for 2.4, there's one for 5 gig. Okay, now this isn't still going to have any effect yet, and even if we disable and turn them back on, it's still not going to have any effect. But this is why I wanted to mention it, to show you the other way of provisioning manually if you wanted to, by adding that profile. But to do this, we would have done this before we connected our access point. So what we're going to do is just go back into our access point, and we're just going to turn off this ability to get to CAPsMAN. So it says no connection to CAPsMAN, and then we just go ahead and delete these two. Okay, now when we turn it back on, enabled, it should then, they've come back again, but as you can see now, it's got all the information. It's even selected its channels, and if we go back onto our cap, it will tell us, there we go, it's in access point mode, and that's the SSID and the channel that it's using. And you can even come in here okay, so now we go back to here, we've got our 2 access points effectively running on our 2 different frequencies. If we go into our back onto our cap, we can see that those, there we go, those interfaces have been dynamically added to that bridge, so the networking should be all set up. So now we can test. What I'm going to do to test is actually going to disable the inbuilt ones, because this machine that I'm actually on is right next to the HAP, so it's going to probably connect to those every time, whereas I want it to be forced to connect to the cap, which is, you know, a few rooms away. So let's just disable those, and then we should still see, I'm still saying connected, so let's just connect that. In fact, it probably might have roamed actually. That'll still be my Raspberry Pi connected probably. So let's go ahead and connect back to that. Okay, 2.4 change there. As you can see, cap Wi-Fi 2. So what we can do is actually rename these as well. If it doesn't really matter for us because we've only got a cap and a hap, but sounds like a Dr. Seuss book. But we're going to call this one cap 01. So if we were to have multiple, and then this is the Wi-Fi 1. So remember that's 5 gig for number 1, and then we'll rename this one to be cap 01 2 gig for 2.4. Okay, so now we go back to registration. You can see it's a bit clearer. So if we would have lots of different access points. So yeah, let's go ahead and turn these ones back on. And I'd imagine that those both the devices, because my Pi and my machine that I'm on are located right next to where the hap is. So I might roam on back onto there. But not always, because as is the fault of Wi-Fi, it's the client that makes the decision to roam. So they don't always know that there's a better signal around, unless this one gets so deteriorated that they need to. But at the moment, you know, the signal's pretty strong as well in there. So we could probably just remove those, and then she might come back on. There we go. One of them's moved. What's that? I think that's my machine. This one. No, I'm on 2.4. So that's me. That's my Raspberry Pi Sonic. There we go. Okay, so there we go. Now we have a fully configured local router and CAPsMAN, all being managed by the same configuration files. And there we go. So if we make any changes to here, so for example, we could change that one to be -1, apply that, and that's going to propagate out across our networks. And when we look at our name, when that refreshes, give it time to sort itself out. There we go. So you can now see -1. You can still see -5, but that will disappear eventually. I'll turn Wi-Fi off on again. There we go. So that's gone. So now we're just left with the 5G-1. But yeah, hopefully that's been clear enough. If you've had problems with this in the past, please let me know. If you've used the older version and, like me, you prefer it, let me know too. If you've got a better way of doing it, then please let me know that too. I'm more than happy to be proved wrong. But yeah, this is the only way I can see to do it. When you do Google this this setup, you get a lot of older information. So if it starts with showing you from the CLI command by saying /CAPsMAN, obviously that no longer exists. Even interface CAPsMAN doesn't exist. So yeah, that's a big giveaway. Some of them will start Wi-Fi Wave 2, which was the precursor to what it is now for this Wi-Fi section. With the advent of I believe AC Wave 2 and then AX, because it was a different way of managing within the CAPsMAN, different packages. So yeah, the menu structure did change quite a bit to how it was to how it is now. And then some devices you'd have an interim state where you could have both the Wi-Fi and the wireless menus. But depending on which package you had installed, which you can see under system packages, whether it's the wireless or the QCOM. But yeah, I won't go into that now. It's worth looking that up. If you do have any questions around that, if you've got a particular firmware version or a particular network adapter type, and you're confused as to why you can't do certain things, then just reach out, and I can do a video to explain that in more detail if you wish. But yeah, like I mentioned, I'll do some more videos coming. Next one will probably be using the multiple SSIDs, and then with the VLANs and the VLANs trunked between a switch maybe, and also look at doing maybe some hotspot integration as well. And then I'll do a few more pieces of Wi-Fi. I plan to do these videos a lot earlier, but the access point I was testing with was I had to use somewhere else. So I had another one I could use, but it was being used by other people. So it was hard to keep pulling that out of production just to use to do some videos on. So I went out and got another one dedicated just to do these videos with. So yes, if you do have any Wi-Fi questions, any Wi-Fi setup advice you'd like, please sing out. Always looking for content ideas, and then I want to make content that people actually need and find useful. So if not, please like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. So thanks.